Welcome to the Her Story Circle podcast, the podcast that brings you the extraordinary tales of everyday women who are changing the world. I'm your host, Gertrude Mache, and I'd like to acknowledge traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today. I also like to pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging. Every week, we dive into the lives, challenges, and triumphs of women from all four corners of the globe. We're here to inspire, enlighten, and connect, sharing stories that uplift and empower. So grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and join us as we explore the incredible journeys of women shaping our future. This is Her Story, where every woman's voice matters. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Her Story Circle. This is Gertrude Mache here in beautiful Melbourne, Australia. And today I am graced with the presence of yet another intriguing young woman. Welcome, welcome, welcome to our tribe. Please tell everybody your full name, where you're based, and share your story with us today.
Kia ora. My name is Nicola Knobel and I am based in the beautiful Wellington in New Zealand. Beautiful country to be based in, and I'm very grateful to be based down here, which is a little bit of where my story kind of gets to as well. So I think getting straight into it, when people hear the word leader, they usually imagine someone with confidence, clarity, control. But what they do not imagine is someone who found their mother after she took her own life or left a country to survive the weight of that trauma, and then only discovered in adulthood that their brain was wired differently. So my story looks successful on the outside, but the truth is far more complicated than that. So a big part of my story starts with my mum. My mum had a long-standing relationship with her own mental health. She had strong narcissistic traits, and I want to be very careful about how I say that because this is about impact rather than labels. And love and safety in our relationship were often tied to achievement. And when I performed well, when I succeeded, when I was impressive, when I was doing okay, I was praised and valued. But when I struggled or if I needed care, there was much less space for that. So as a child, you adapt quickly to that kind of environment. You learn that being exceptional is safer than being honest. You learn that your worth is something that you earn, not something that you inherently have or become, or you become good at reading expectations and meeting them. So I chased excellence all the time. She died by suicide when I was in university, and I was also the person who found her. And that experience changed the entirety or the entire shape of my life. When something that traumatic happens so young, you grow up very quickly. And I didn't have siblings or another parent to rely on. I had myself. So after my mum died, my entire framework collapsed. The person whose approval I had spent my entire life unconsciously working for was suddenly gone. And I lost not only my mother, but the kind of reference point I had used to measure my own worth. And that loss forced me to keep moving, to keep achieving, because stopping would mean sitting with grief or the identity questions I did not yet have tools to face. So when you grow up without that anchor, you become really good at reading the room, predicting needs, managing risk, working out situations. You learn to become really independent early. You learn to keep going. And those skills have really helped me survive. But they also taught me to mask emotional needs. I learned to be kind of a present competence, even when I was overwhelmed. And I think many autistic and ADHD women will recognize that pattern. You learn to cope a bit too well. That wiring was a value of performance that she fostered in me. And it stayed with me until adulthood. Achievement became my kind of language of belonging, my love language. If I was succeeding, I was okay. If I slowed down or I faltered, my nervous system reacted as if something was wrong. So in the years that followed, I became very good at being competent and composed and high performing. And even when I was burning out, I was masking long before I understood what masking was. And that coping strategy served me well for a long time, but it also stopped me from understanding my own needs. So after my mother died, staying kind of felt really impossible for me. I originally grew up in South Africa, and it's a very tricky country to navigate, especially when you have no anchor points. Everywhere I went, there were reminders of what had happened. Streets, routines, familiar places. Everything carried the weight of what had happened. Grief is not something I could kind of leave at home. It followed me into my daily life. And I realized that if I stayed where I was, I would remain trapped essentially for eternity in that one moment. So I left. I packed everything up and left it behind me, and I traveled to Thailand to work in oil and gas. And at the time, I framed it as healing in my mind. But what it was in reality was survival. I needed to distance myself from the language, the environment, and the memories. I thought that if I had put myself somewhere completely unfamiliar with new sensory inputs, new work, new challenges, my brain might finally get some relief and I would stop thinking about the trauma that had unfolded. Working in oil and gas kind of gives you a really interesting structure, an intensity, a purpose. It was high pressure, highly technical, required constant problem solving, and that suits me. What I did not understand, though, was that when we look at that self-selecting environment, it matched my neurotype. I was drawn to complexity, clear consequences, and roles where vigilance or black and white structure or actions like that were valued. And that hyper alertness that had once kept me safe at home in these spaces was rewarded. So at the same time, I was masking constantly. New country, new culture, new expectations, new language. I adapted quickly because that's what I had always done. I learned the rules, the tone, the behaviors that made me seem capable and in control. From the outside, it looked like resilience. Inside, though, exhaustion. And that period of my life really taught me something important. And even though I didn't have the language for it yet, distance can create breathing room, but it does not replace understanding. I had escaped the reminders, but I had not yet understood myself enough. And that understanding only came later when I could finally connect kind of the grief, the neurodivergence, and kind of that drive to work in really high stakes environments into like a single coherent story. And I think as well, when you migrate, it forces you to rebuild your identity from scratch, which can feel terrifying, especially when you do not yet understand your own way of thinking. And looking back, I realized I gravitated to roles where ambiguity and high impact, it was tangible because it kept me focused and energized. But I also masked heavily to fit into the new cultures, the systems, and those expectations. And it took me years to understand how draining that was. When I arrived in Aotearoa, New Zealand, something felt really different almost immediately. There was almost a values-based, community-orientated way of leading that resonated very deeply with me. The leadership here is often less about hierarchy and ego and more about service, responsibility, collective well-being. And there are concepts like manakitanga, which is collective caring, or whakawhanaungatanga, which is interconnectedness and speaking to people on like a one-to-one basis. And looking after people as a whole is not just words. They show up in how organizations think about impact and care. And for the first time, I felt like my way of thinking wasn't something I had to hide, The emphasis on community and fairness and relational leadership really aligned with what I had already been thinking and seeing in the work that I had been doing. And it allowed me to bring both my competence and my humanity into work with me and bring those two things together. And that sense of fit mattered more than I realized at the time. It created a space for me to stop performing and start contributing more honestly as a person and as a leader. So my autism diagnosis did not arrive until adulthood. I was already a mother. I was already in senior leadership. I was already carrying a lifetime of adapting without knowing why and constantly feeling like I didn't fit in anywhere. Getting formally diagnosed was not for the label. It was for reframing how I thought about life in general. Now, for those that don't know, a little bit of context. ADHD is an informal term that describes someone who meets the diagnostic criteria for both autism and ADHD, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. It is not a separate diagnosis, but a way of acknowledging that both neurotypes can coexist in the same person. Prior to 2013, clinical practice often didn't allow for the formal dual diagnosis of autism and ADHD, and this changed with the updates to the diagnostic frameworks. And as a result, combined presentations like ADHD were being recognized more often in adulthood. And studies report that between 28% and 38% of autistic individuals also have co-occurring ADHD diagnoses when assessed with the modern criteria. People with ADHD often experience a mix of traits that can seem contradictory. For example, a strong need for structure and predictability, alongside sustaining attention or deep focus on interests, also combined with high sensitivity to sensory input. But a lot of women develop sophisticated coping strategies, particularly women with late diagnosed adults, which can delay recognition for many years. And understanding that can be life-changing because it explains patterns like chronic burnout, intense masking, heightened rejection sensitivity, feeling both capable and constantly overwhelmed. And it gives you almost a framework for understanding your own nervous system. It made sense of my intensity. It made sense of my pattern spotting, my need for clarity, the fact that I could hold incredibly complex risks and systems in my head really easily, but it also explained how quickly I would burn out. It explained the masking, and it explained why so often I felt misunderstood, even when I was performing at a high level. So this diagnosis kind of gave me permission to stop kind of contorting myself into a box that I didn't fit into. So with that context in mind, today, my role is in health, safety, and risk assurance. I'm the head of that space for a charity here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And this work is so important to me because risk and safety are about people. They're about creating environments where people can show up and be who they are without fear. Whereas for me, I grew up in that fear and I had to perform in a particular way. Psychological safety, neuroinclusivity, and well-being are not abstract ideas. They're the difference between surviving and thriving, and it joins the dots between my personal and professional identities. My neurodivergence means that I notice patterns that others miss, and I pick up on weak signals, inconsistencies, and systemic pressure points quickly. That makes me really good at risk. But more importantly, it makes me committed to building safer environments for both people and teams. When you have spent most of your life adapting to fit the systems you don't fit into, you eventually realize you were there actually just to redefine the systems as a whole. So for me, this has been a really incredible journey around unmasking. And it's not becoming someone new, it's about becoming someone honest. And autism hasn't limited my leadership, it has strengthened it. And it's given me depth and clarity and purpose that I wasn't expecting. And sharing it publicly, I'm hoping, will empower others who have walked similar paths. Late diagnosed women often carry shame, confusion, because they've spent their whole lives thinking they were failing at being neurotypical. So I'm hoping that my message is that this is not a failure story. This is a recognition story. It's about reclaiming your own personal journey and using it as a form of personal power to really drive yourself into a honest and holistic way of being.
Wow. What an experience you've had, Nicola. So many hoops you've had to jump, losing your mom at a young age, immigrating to a foreign country. So let's unpack your story and start at the beginning.
Sure.
How did losing your mother so early change the way that you've learned to survive and lead?
I think the key thing is that when you lose an anchor point, you kind of hook everything onto that anchor point. And when you have to find that anchor point within yourself, it is very, very difficult. And even now, I struggle with finding ways to feel proud of myself, or find ways to feel like I've accomplished something. I don't often believe I have. So it's really forced me into a position where I have to kind of go deep to actually feel okay with myself a lot of the time. And I realize that for many others, they may have people in their lives that they can lean on for support, but I didn't have that. So I had to find it within myself. And it's really changed the way that I see, others potentially, where I almost feel like a little bit of envy or a little bit of jealousy when people are like, oh, they can go to, their mum or their dad or a family member for support. It's like, I love that for them. I just feel for myself almost a loss or a grief kind of associated with that.
So, what did strength look like for you before you had the language for your neurodivergence?
Chaos. It's, I look back and it's almost heartbreaking to know that I was just constantly pushing myself. I had to be a certain way. I had to deliver a certain way. I had to be the best at everything. I had to communicate the best with everybody. I had to show up in the most pristine way. I scripted conversations, made sure that I was over-prepared for things, over-organized, thinking that that's how everybody was. Anyone that was a good leader that's what they were doing. But no, it wasn't what everybody else was doing. I just was trying extra hard to fit into that leadership box. And so strength looked like masking, and it probably still will for a little while, because unmasking yourself is quite messy.
So what was the emotional impact of being diagnosed later in life?
Relief, because you can look at yourself and go, actually, I have permission in myself to, do things a little differently or show up differently. And I can put in boundaries that I have no experience in doing, because I've always had to, be the best or do the best things. Whereas now I have the language and the tools to turn around and say, actually, I need to put these boundaries in place to protect my energy, my thoughts, my meltdowns. I've got things in place now, which has been game changing.
I love that. Now, when you look back, what behaviors were misunderstood by others and by yourself?
Ooh, that's an interesting one, because there's so many behaviors that keep popping up for me. And the more I learn about autism and ADHD, especially as a late diagnosed woman, there's more and more things that keep popping up, which are fascinating in themselves. collecting things, collecting things as a kid, making sure that I had all my books in color order. My clothing has always been in color order. Making sure that things are a certain way in the kitchen, for example. Now as an adult, everything has a home. Nothing is out of place. But there's also things that you don't realize, like, for example, making sure that once you've had feedback or like critical or criticism, I would say, at work, you feel devastated. It hurts your body that someone has given you feedback at work, and you're like, but why do I feel like this? Does everybody feel like this after feedback? Like, how do we do this better? Because I feel like crap. But it's like, actually, no, your body is wired to treat the feedback not like everybody else. Your body's treating that feedback as a threat to yourself and well-being, and because your body is acting that way, you feel like that. And learning those things has been so important. And I think when you're having a meltdown, for example, people will be like, oh, you're being so over dramatic. It's like, well, no, it's not over dramatic. It's that my body is literally shutting down, and you are responding to a version that you're used to of me. You're not responding to what I actually am, just me as a person as a whole.
Now, how did masking show up in your career, your relationships, and your leadership style? And how much energy does it take for you to do that?
Masking is interesting. There is so much research around it. In the DSM-5, which is the diagnostic manual for, diagnoses, masking comes in a couple of different ways. So ADHD masking and autism masking have similar traits, but they are actually quite different. And when you have the combined morbidity of both, they show up in some really interesting ways. So a couple of those ways is you struggle with boundaries. So you can't you essentially can't say no, because that is a threat on your well-being. You can never say no because someone might hate you, and that leads to the feeling of and the stress of fear. In the workplace, that means you're taking on more work. You are presenting yourself in a way at work that is going to be likable, palatable. You're not showing up and going, oh, guys, can we switch off the lights because the lights are so bright? You're not saying that. You're like, oh, this is great. Thank you so much for coming to this meeting that could have been an email. There's all of these things that you end up realizing, essentially, you're just faking your way through being nice to people. I'm not saying that I'm unnice to people, just to be clear, but it's like you are forcing yourself to make eye contact with people. You are forcing yourself to say no if you need to. It's very difficult to say no. It's kind of forcing yourself to be, okay, yes, thank you so much for that feedback. It hasn't destroyed my soul at all. Going to Christmas parties is a good example. I absolutely loathe going to Christmas parties. But you go to them because it's socially acceptable. Oh, morning tea for Sarah's new baby. Yes, we will go to. I don't want to go to Sarah's morning tea. There's too many people. But it's all of these things that you're just so used to doing because it's socially acceptable. But in reality, it is exhausting. And then you get home and you crash out and you are completely drained. There is no coming back until you have recovered. And I think the really strong misconception is that burnout is the same for neurotypical people and for people that are neurodivergent. It's two very different burnouts. Burnout for neurotypical people, you can take a weekend off, you can, have a couple of sleeps, it might take a week or so, but you'll bounce back. But where you are neurodivergent, it can take years to bounce back, and a little sleep and a little relax, a little read your book, a little vacation away isn't going to fix the situation. It's the high multitasking, it's the demands, it's the sensory overload. Those things need to be removed, and they're actually very tricky to remove in the workplace.
Yeah.
So it becomes quite the balance.
Wow. So, what do workplaces get wrong about confidence and professionalism?
What do workplaces get wrong? I think there is an expectation for if for especially neurodivergent people to show up in a certain way.
Yes.
There's quite a lot of research around the fact that in workplaces, if you disclose that you have autism or ADHD, usually with ADHD more so than autism, people see you as less than. So you may have been performing really well over, let's say, a year, and the minute you disclose your ADHD diagnosis, your performance reviews start coming down, or people start seeing you as almost infantile, and they pathologize the ADHD and the autism, which is really interesting. They've noted that in interviews before you even start a job with autism, the minute you disclose one of these things, the points based on your skills and adaptability actually come down as well. So people have quite a strong bias towards, or against, I should say, people with neurodivergent tendencies. So there is this expectation that you're going to perform at a certain level. And I think that's where we go very wrong, is it's like we're not asking people how they will thrive in the organization. We're asking people to thrive at a level that wasn't made for them in the first place.
Yeah, that is so, so true. So, how does neurodivergence challenge traditional leadership models?
In so many ways. You know, we as a traditional globe, we love leadership that is charismatic and innovative. And, you know, we have these leadership tenets that we stick to. And we have got neurodivergent leaders that are all of those things, but in different ways. And you look at ADHD, and our ADHDers out there are innovative, smart, really quick at problem solving, creatives, like awesome human beings, but they're not rewarded for that unless they act neurotypical. And it's the same with autism. You've got deep thinkers, you've got people that can really solve complex and really intensive problems. And again, we love rewarding that if you look normal. But if you do not, then you're not rewarded for that. So yeah, it's really interesting how we've kind of missed the mark on that in so many different ways.
Wow. Now, you have gone through so much in your life, in all of the things that you have done to bring yourself to this level and to the understanding that you have with neurodivergence. If there was somebody who's listening to us now, who's going through a similar challenge and needs advice, if I could take you back to the younger you and ask you to give us or give yourself 3 nuggets of wisdom based on what life has taught you up until this point, what would those 3 nuggets of wisdom be?
I think the first one is that you are allowed to rethink your entire story. You're allowed to rethink it. You're allowed to go back and realize that there were traits that you once thought might have been flaws, but they were actually signals. You know, you're allowed to understand yourself with new language, and understanding your neurotype is not indulgent. It's kind of foundational for building a sustainable life long term. And, you know, I think the big thing that a lot of people often ask me is, well, you know, that is a lot to kind of get through and do and etc. But it's really important to make sure that we kind of deliver on who we are authentically. And I think if we forget to do that, that's okay too, because life is a journey and we have to kind of go through it to get to the other end and know that if you've done it authentically, then you're going to feel better about it.
Fantastic. Now, tell us a little bit about your book and where people can get the book.
You can get it pretty much on Amazon, which is quite exciting. The book has been really a labor of love, and it's about unmasking leadership. Originally, I was going to call it The Leadership Lie, but someone had stolen that book idea already. And essentially, all it is talking about how traditional leadership really likes to just categorize people as one particular type of thing. And, a little bit of a lull, but essentially most leadership is based on old white guys. So kind of shaking that up a little bit and saying, actually, maybe that traditional form of leadership is not what we need anymore. So the book is essentially for leaders that are neurodivergent themselves, particularly women, but can be for anybody. But if you are a neurodivergent leader yourself, it's how you kind of come to better realizations within yourself and in your workplace, and asking out loud for accommodations that you may not have had the bravery or the conversation starters to get going. And then it's also for people that potentially are managing teams with neurodivergent people in it, or teams that are neurodivergent themselves with a manager that might not be neurodivergent. It's kind of this conversation starter for everyone. It's not a diagnosis tool. It's not anything like that. There's a lot of research in there. I think the last 1 billion pages is just banks of research. So it is a little bit of lived experience, but mainly around research and rejection sensitivity and helping people just understand what it's like to work in an environment when you think differently.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for coming online and sharing this incredible story. It's exciting to have you as part of our community and to see women breaking into the leadership space where we are not normally represented as well. Thank you for the interview.
Thank you.
And thank you to everybody who tuned in. The Her Story Circle is not just a podcast. We're a social impact movement that brings you the stories and voices of women from all over the world. We share these stories to uplift you, to inspire you, to energize you, but most importantly, to take you from where you are now to where you're trying to go. So tune in again tomorrow when I interview yet another amazing guest. In the meantime, have a fantastic day, morning, or evening, wherever you are in the world, and bye for now. Thank you for tuning into the Her Story Circle podcast. I hope today's story has inspired you to believe in the power of our stories and the difference you can make in the world when you use your voice. I'm Gertrude Mache, and it's been an honor to share this space with you, where voices from all walks of life come together to weave a rich tapestry of diverse perspectives. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast to help us share these stories with more listeners. Follow us on social media by looking for the Her Story Circle podcast for more updates. And join us tomorrow for another episode filled with courage, resilience, and empowerment. Remember, your story matters, and together we're building a stronger, more inclusive world. Until next time, keep making her story. Thank you so much.